A reading from the book of Joel. Truly the day of the Lord is great, terrible indeed. Who can endure it? Yet even now, says the Lord, return to me with all your heart, with fasting and weeping and with mourning. Rend your hearts and not your clothing. Return to the Lord your God, for God is gracious and merciful, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love, and relents from punishing. Who knows whether he will not turn and relent and leave a blessing behind him, a grain offering and a drink offering for the Lord your God? Blow the trumpet in Zion. Sanctify a fast, call a solemn assembly, gather the people. Sanctify the congregation, assemble the aged, gather the children, even infants at the breast. Let the bridegroom leave his room and the bride her canopy. Between the vestibule and the altar, let the priests, the ministers of the Lord, weep. Let them say, spare your people, O Lord, and do not make your heritage a mockery, a byword among the nations. Why should it be said among the peoples, where is their God? The word of the Lord. Would you please stand for the reading of the gospel? The Holy Gospel according to Matthew.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Jesus said to the disciples, beware of practicing your piety before others in order to be seen by them, for then you have no reward from your Father in heaven. So whenever you give alms, do not sound a trumpet before you as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, so that they may be praised by others. Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward. But when you give alms, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your alms may be done in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. And whenever you pray, do not be like the hypocrites, for they love to stand and pray in the synagogues and at the street corners, so that they may be seen by others. Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward. But whenever you pray, go into your room and shut the door and pray to your Father who is in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. And whenever you fast, do not look dismal like the hypocrites, for they disfigure their faces as to show others that they are fasting. Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward. But when you fast, put oil on your head and wash your face, so that your fasting may be seen not by others, but by your Father who is in secret. And your Father who sees in secret will reward you. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust consume and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust consumes and where thieves do not break in and steal. For wherever your treasure is, there your heart will be also. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Christ.
I want to say thank you to Grace. And another welcome to all of you, and to welcome to those who are with us online this evening. Once a year, we come together and we put schmutz on our faces. Every other day of the year, we do our level best to keep our faces clean. I don't know if any of you have ever been told that you need to clean your face. Maybe when you were smaller, that happened more often. But I hear, embarrassingly often, the expression, "Dear, you have food on your face again." We humans spend countless hours, countless precious minutes washing our faces, checking to make sure they're clean in the mirror. We have whole regimens of cleansing and moisturizing and shaving and tweezing, softening and protecting. We work so hard. And then, once a year, we get together and we put schmutz on our faces. So why do we do this? Maybe the easy, quick response is that we put ashes on our foreheads and make Lenten resolutions to give things up and to remind ourselves that we are sinners. Ash Wednesday is the beginning of Lent, a time when we remember that all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. And because of this, through these 40 days of Lent, we watch Jesus journey to Jerusalem and the cross. Another way to explain our ritual of ashes is that we are reminding ourselves of our mortality. We acknowledge that our lives are short. Remember that you are dust, and to dust you shall return. And yet, I'm not sure that the message of the fallenness of humanity, or maybe the reminder of the brevity of our lives, is really the message we need to hear right now. War in Ukraine, hate crimes against people of color, millions dead worldwide because of a global pandemic. These things leave us painfully aware of the brokenness and the frailty of humanity. Do we really need ashes and sacrificial spiritual practices right now as a part of our lives of faith? The author of an article I read recently put it this way: in the old days, Lent almost always meant giving up something whose absence I would feel acutely. Coffee, perhaps, or cussing. In that way, I would be reminded again and again of what this season is for. But the practice of imposed sacrifice feels as alien to me now as anything else from my decades as a practicing Catholic. Haven't we all had enough sacrifice in these last years? Every day, I grieve 2 beloved family members lost during this pandemic. Every day, I bear the grief of a burning world. I don't need to give up cussing about the invasion of Ukraine, too. And yet, though the traditional interpretations of the purpose of Ash Wednesday may not be or feel as compelling for us right now, here we all are, beginning a Lenten journey together anew. We who have been through Lenten season after Lenten season know that there is something in the Lenten journey, in that Lenten reality, to grab a hold of in the midst of a suffering and fearful world. We know that there's something healing about this season of journeying with Jesus. We find a clue about what this might be in our gospel passage for tonight. In this passage, which comes from the Sermon on the Mount, we don't find Jesus trying to emphasize to the disciples how sinful they are. Rather, we see Jesus giving them a beautiful reminder to come back to the basics. Jesus teaches his disciples about doing the work of ministry and faith with authenticity. When you do your acts of piety, he begins, which maybe is better translated as when you do justice. When you do justice, do it with authenticity. Jesus then goes on to outline what that might look like with 3 particular disciplines in mind: praying, giving alms, and fasting. When Jesus teaches about prayer, his focus is on restoring a sense of simplicity and offering ourselves to God, asking God to help, to provide, to forgive, maybe to help us forgive. Jesus emphasizes that it's not about grand, long prayers, but about coming before God, recognizing that a life of discipleship depends on being in relationship with God. Just pray, Jesus might say. Jesus also teaches about the giving of alms, or the doing of kindness, is another way to translate it. Once again, Jesus' focus is on authenticity. Do kindness to others. Give to others freely. It's so easy to give to others with the expectation of thanks or appreciation. But this reduces it to a base transaction. It cheapens the gift to demand thanks for it. Let it be done with a sincere heart. We got to go to Monterey recently to visit my family, my parents and my brother-in-law, my brother and sister-in-law. They all live on the same Langford compound, is what we call it. And I was doing some morning yoga before the girls went to school. And my 6-year-old niece, Eloise, came up to me. She said, "Did you have any dreams last night?" And of course, I hadn't, but I knew that the right thing to do was then to ask if she had, which of course she had. And she said, "I dreamed that someone gave me a bunch of money." Sounds pretty good. So what did you do, or what would you do with all that money if someone gave you a bunch of money? Well, I'd give it all away. People who need it, like the poor. But I'd keep $1 for myself. This really warmed my heart, naturally. She modeled something so simple, so authentic. The desire to do good for others with only a modest $1 as her prize. Jesus also teaches his disciples about fasting. And once again, his focus is on authenticity. When you deny yourself something so that someone else can have, don't draw attention to your act of sacrifice. Let it be a simple gift to God. It's like the story, or a story, of Frog and Toad. Anyone know about Frog and Toad? Frog and Toad, 2 children's book characters, are good friends. And one fall day, Frog decides that he will go and rake the leaves in Toad's yard. But he'll do it secretly, so Toad doesn't know. So Frog goes to Toad's house. makes sure nobody's home, and then he proceeds to rake the leaves. Unbeknownst to Frog, Toad had had the very same idea. And so, at the same time, they are both raking each other's leaves, unbeknownst to the other. When both had completed their work, they each walked toward their own houses, taking a different path, missing each other in the dark. And while they walk, a strong wind comes in and blows all the piles away so that their raking is, negligible, or can't even tell that they've done any raking at all. But they go home nonetheless, smiling to themselves, thinking about what a delightful surprise it will be for the other when they find out that their leaves had been raked. And then, of course, the next day, they wake up not having any clue about what happened at the other's house and rake their own leaves, smiling, thinking to themselves how grateful they'll be. It's not about the measurable impact of the deed. It's about the quality of the heart with which it's done. When I read this gospel passage and think about the authenticity that Jesus calls us to live out as we live out a life of discipleship, I don't find myself suddenly unworried about my sinful nature or unafraid about the current state of the world. But I do find some sense of calm that Jesus has laid out a path of discipleship on which we can journey with him through Lent and whatever else may come. Tonight, as we prepare to begin our Lenten journeys, we know that ultimately what Lent is about is responding to Jesus' call to do justice with authenticity and simplicity of heart, acknowledging that we don't always get it right and that that's okay. The imposition of ashes reminds us of the basic truth that our identity is ultimately as created children of God. We are made of dust. But the cross on our foreheads reminds us of another thing as well. We have been marked with the cross of Christ, and we live in hope that Christ will come again and set this world aright. And what could be more healing than that? So once a year, we put schmutz on our faces. And with it, we remember that our part in the grand adventure of faith is ultimately very simple. To live in sincere, authentic expectation of a risen Christ. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. We enter as dust, and to dust we will return. And our call in the meantime is to trust that God will do what God always does. Grant us the healing grace we need to walk with Jesus on the journey to Good Friday, to Easter, and beyond.